back to Health Talk here on AETV Live. My name is Ogaga Ekama, and I'm your host. I've still got Nurse Juanita Akpomeyuma here, and we are still focusing on self-care. She has told us what self-care is, the types of self-care. The most interesting one for me was when she talked about digital self-care and how to do it, reducing your screen time and all of that. And she also talked about physical and mental and also emotional. Then we talked a little about the importance and benefits of self-care. If you missed the last episode, do well to check it out and subscribe to this channel so you always be updated whenever a new video drops. Now, during the introduction, when I was talking, I realized that you listed 4 types, but I think we didn't talk in detail physical self-care. We talked about mental, we talked about the emotional and digital. So before we come back to importance and benefits, let's talk about physical self-care.
Okay. Physical self-care are those activities that you carry out physically to care for yourself, to nurture yourself. For example, we have exercises, we have eating LD. Eating LD is one of those things. You don't want to come out looking obese. You want to come out looking fit, and you want to come out looking healthy. Also, spending time with loved ones improve your physical self-care. So I've talked about exercising, I've talked about eating LD, I've talked about spending time with loved ones. Then also spending time with loved ones here, it also involves social gatherings as well. Attending parties, attending occasions with loved ones. Those are also part of physical self-care.
All right. So now let's talk about the importance and benefits of self-care. You talked about rejuvenating, restoration.
Yeah.
It helps maintain relationship and the mood and all of that. So what's the psychology behind all of this, especially how just taking care of yourself, for example, physical self-care, is it taking care of my skin and all of that, just looking good and all that. So how does it, what's the effect on the mood per se?
Okay, I'm going to give an instance. For example, you're having a bad day or you woke up feeling moody and you are the type that exercise a lot. You go out for a run. When you get back home, there's this sense of fulfillment that it gives you. You've done something for yourself. Then also, if you're having a bad day, I've had friends that say this, that if you're having a bad day, spray a nice perfume, dress good, and go out. You'll feel better by yourself. Because one, you get compliments that will make you smile. You get, if you're a lady, you get advances from the opposite gender. So that will like boost your confidence level, boost your mood, relieve stress and anxiety also.
All right. So when we're talking about this topic, before we decide to settle with self-care, we talked about something very interesting. I'd never heard of it before now. Self-care in relation to women preventive care timeline. I'm like, what's that? So I believe that the viewer now is wondering, like, what is that? So can you let us know what you mean by self-care in relation to women preventive care timeline?
Okay. So firstly, I'm going to talk about what women preventive care timeline is. Is like a timeline for women at each time of your life, what you're supposed to do as a lady. One, for you to live longer. Two, for you to be physically well and mentally well. So those are the timeline that I'm going to be talking about today. So women preventive care timeline is just basically what you ought to do as a lady, as a woman, as a girl child at each time of your life. So if this is not self-care, I don't know what to call it. Yeah, it should be included in self-care. Yes. So today we're talking about self-care in relation to women preventive care timeline.
Okay. So now you've explained what women preventive care timeline is.
Yeah.
So now let's get the timeline.
Okay.
Per se, and what is expected by the female gender, because now this is limited to the female gender, what is expected of them at a particular age, or what is expected of their parents or guardians, because I believe they might be turned at a particular time to do this for themselves. So.
Yeah. So for the girl child, from your teenage years till your 20s, every girl child ought to be immunized or vaccinated with the human papilloma virus vaccine.
Okay.
The human papilloma virus is known to cause cervical cancer in our day-to-day. So from your teen years, let me say from age 9 to your 20s, you ought to have been vaccinated with this human papilloma virus vaccine. Then from your 20s to your 30s, every girl child, every girl out there, every lady ought to have started carrying out self-breast examination, cervical screening every 3 years, mammogrammy every 3 years, then test for sexually transmitted infection if you are sexually active. Then one last vaccine. We
Okay,
have
go ahead.
one last vaccine. We have the hepatitis B vaccine, the yellow fever vaccine, those other important vaccines for your 20s to your 30s.
Okay. So now you mentioned quite a couple of things. So you said between age 9 to 20 should be the HPV vaccination.
Age 9 to your 20s.
Yes.
20s, yeah.
Yeah. HPV vaccination. And what does that prevent?
Cervical cancer.
Cervical cancer. Okay. Then also you talked about in the 20s, you mentioned breast examination. And you also mentioned mammogram.
Yes.
Mammogram. Or what's it? So what's the difference between the self-breast examination and the mammogram?
So self-breast examination, like the name implies, it involves self. You do it yourself. We'll talk about that in details, maybe some other time.
So, but can you just give a little insight into that? Like,
okay, it just you as a lady examining your breast for lumps, for discharges, for discoloration or change in the texture of your breast area. Yes. The mammogrammy, it involves using the mammogram machine to detect any abnormality in your breast. Okay, the mammogrammy has to be done by a specialist now. Okay, then you talked about cervical screening. So between age 9 and 20 should be when you get the vaccination. Yes. Then between your 20s, 30s, you're going for your screening. Like how often? Every 3 years. Okay, once every 3 years. Okay, that's nice. Then you also mentioned hepatitis B. Yeah. The vaccination or the screening? The vaccination. Okay. But before you get vaccinated with the hepatitis B vaccine, you ought to have been screened to certify you do not have the virus. So before that vaccination, you ought to have been screened. Okay. But it's very essential that we all get vaccinated against hepatitis B virus. Then you talked about the STIs test. Yes. No, so now, before we move to the 30s and beyond, now, while interacting with females, I've realized, I know you're a nurse and you found yourself in this situation. So I want you to speak to this. When interacting with females, I always hear this, or most of the times, if not all the times, I've heard ladies that are sexually active, especially, at this part of the world, they're sexually active when they are not yet married in their 20s. And they say things like, if a doctor or a medical personnel asks me in front of my parents if I'm sexually active, they'll say no. So what do you have to say? What advice as a health professional do you have to say? Because it might be a situation where I take my child to the hospital and we're doing this self-care stuff and you're telling me that, okay, in 20s, the person should do STI test and my child is there with me and you just throw the question at my child, like, are you sexually active? And there is this that is not well. And child is like, no. So how do you expect children to cope with this? How do you expect them to react to this? And how do you expect parents? Because sometimes some children, they're also scared of the reaction of their parents. So I just want you to do a little enlightenment and education so the children and parents alike. You're looking at me like, why are you setting me up? But honestly, you are in the position to do that. So. Okay, so I believe it falls within the prerogative of the medical professional asking the parents to excuse them. So he or she will have a conversation with that child. Then also these STIs these days, some of them are not usually sexually transmitted. Some of them involve sharing toiletries, sharing the bathroom with an infected person.
Oh,
For example, the people that are in school hostels now, my roommates might be sexually active and I might not be sexually active. So my roommate's boyfriend has this particular STI or okay, yes, STI. Then she gets it, she comes back to the hostel. She uses the same restroom, and that restroom has not been properly cleaned for a very long time.
okay.
It's very, very likely for me
Excuse
to
me.
also get infected with that same bacteria she has brought
Okay.
into the hostel.
So it's not necessary because STI is sexually transmitted.
Yeah.
So you're saying an infection
Yes.
can also get into the body of a woman, not necessarily through
Yes.
sex.
Yes.
but
Not
also-
necessarily through sex.
Okay.
That's where hygiene comes in.
Okay, that's where personal hygiene comes in.
Yeah.
All right, it's been an interesting and insightful conversation thus far here on Health Talk with your host, Gaga Ikema. We're still looking at self-care, and this episode has majored on self-care in relation to Women Preventive Care Timeline, and Nurse Juanita Akpomeyoma has been giving us the rundown of the timeline. She has told us from 9 to 20. We've talked about the 20s. In the next episode, we'll pick up from the 30s. Just stay with us.